The room was filled with sirens and the blinding pulse of red and blue lights bleeding through shattered glass. A man stood outside the tape line, his shirt stained, his hands trembling, and his eyes locked on the body bag being zipped shut. "No, please, tell me it's not him," he whispered, his voice barely audible beneath the chaos. Detective Sarah Bishop moved through the crowd with practiced precision, stopping when she saw the man collapse to his knees. "Sir, do you know the victim?" she asked. The man didn't answer. He couldn't. Inside the bag was the body of a young man, clean-cut, fresh suit, company badge still clipped to his shirt. Logan Reed, age 19, cause of death, 2 gunshots to the chest. The man outside the tape, his name was Calvin, and what he would soon discover was a truth so cruel, so soul-shattering, it would drag him into a darkness deeper than any prison cell he had ever known. He wasn't just a bystander. He wasn't even just a criminal. He was the father, and he had just killed his own son without even realizing it. Before we uncover the full truth, make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell. These stories aren't just shocking, they're real. Be part of a community that dares to feel, to question, to remember. Don't miss what others wish they'd seen coming. Calvin Reed had never been good at being still. Even as a kid growing up in South Boston, he was always on the move, hustling on corners, skipping school, outrunning consequences. His mother used to say he was born with restless blood. By the time he was 21, that restlessness had turned into full-blown recklessness, armed robbery, grand theft, 3 counts of assault, 12 years in federal prison. But prison does something to a man, not the walls. It's the silence. Calvin spent years listening to the sound of his own guilt echoing off cinder blocks. Every year, the weight of what he'd done grew heavier, and so did the thought of what he missed, especially the one thing he had never seen, his son. Melissa, the woman he once loved, had written only once. It was short, cold. "You're going away. I'm pregnant. Don't try to find us." That letter became his gospel. He read it so many times the paper nearly disintegrated. He didn't blame her. Hell, he barely recognized the man she had left. Behind bars, Calvin swore he'd change. He kept to himself, got sober, read books, even picked up carpentry from another inmate. Each day, he built furniture and imagined building a life he never had, one where his son would one day look him in the eyes and see a man worth knowing. When the gates finally opened, Calvin walked out with nothing but a backpack, a photo of a boy he'd never met, and a quiet desperation clawing at his ribs. He moved into a halfway house on the edge of town, took a job hauling construction debris, and tried to live invisible. But the world doesn't let you forget. The tattoos on his arms, the way he looked over his shoulder too often. People noticed. Employers noticed. "Sorry, we're not hiring felons," was the phrase he heard the most. Still, he never broke again. Not for 10 months. He saved every dollar, avoided every temptation, and each night he stared at that old photo like a lighthouse on a stormy coast. Then one day, he saw Logan's name, his son's name, in a news article online. It was a corporate announcement, a promotion. Logan Reed appointed youngest regional finance manager at Whitaker Logistics. Calvin's hand trembled as he touched the screen. He whispered, "You made it." And for the first time in years, he let himself believe, maybe, just maybe, he could too. Calvin spent the next few days in a daze, reading that article over and over like it was a prayer. Logan looked older now, sharper in the face, more confident in the eyes. There was a photo of him shaking hands with the company's CEO, smiling wide, unaware that somewhere out there, the man who gave him life was watching in silence. That article ignited something in Calvin, not just pride, but urgency. The distance between who he had been and who his son had become felt enormous, and Calvin couldn't bear the thought of remaining a ghost in Logan's story. So he made a plan. He would build a life clean enough, strong enough, to stand in front of Logan and say, "I tried, I changed." He knew the boy had every right to slam the door in his face, but he also knew this might be the only chance he'd ever get. He wasn't going to blow it, but life outside was unforgiving. The halfway house had strict rules, and his job barely paid enough for rent and meals. He applied to everything he could, warehouses, moving companies, even janitorial gigs, but the answer was always the same: "We'll let you know." They never did. His savings dwindled. Some nights he went to sleep with a gnawing hunger in his gut. Others, he walked aimlessly through the city, staring at apartments he couldn't afford, lives he'd never live. Then on a rainy afternoon, a familiar voice called his name. "Calvin, shit man, I thought you were dead." It was Derek Malone, a name Calvin hadn't heard in over a decade. Derek had been one of his closest running partners before the bust, a streetwise schemer with a gift for finding trouble and a sixth sense for money. They met at a diner. Derek looked older, but smoother. Slick jacket, clean fade, gold chain peeking from his collar. "You working?" he asked. "Trying to." Derek smirked. "Trying don't pay rent." He slid a burner phone across the table. "I got something lined up. Clean, easy, no heat." "You in or not?" Calvin hesitated. Everything in him screamed no. But the thought of showing up at Logan's door empty-handed, a broke ex-con, made his stomach twist. "I'm done with that life," he said quietly. Derek leaned in. "Then why the hell are you still starving?" Calvin didn't take the phone. Not yet. But the seed had been planted. That night, he visited Melissa's neighborhood for the first time in years. He stayed in the shadows, far from her front porch, just watching. It was a modest home, 2 stories, white paint flaking at the edges. Lights were on. Inside, silhouettes moved. A dinner table, laughter, life. He saw Logan through the window, standing tall, his hand on Melissa's shoulder. They looked close, like family, like everything Calvin had never had. He whispered into the dark, "I'm sorry," then walked away. The next morning, he tried to go back to work. The foreman told him the company had hired someone else, someone more stable. When he returned to the halfway house, his bunk was empty. His roommate, a kid named Vince, had OD'd in the bathroom. Calvin sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the burner phone, still in his backpack. He hadn't touched it since the diner. Now, he powered it on. One message. "Warehouse, Whitaker Logistics, Thursday night, 1 vault, 1 run, no blood." Calvin stared at the screen. Whitaker Logistics, the same place where Logan worked. He told himself it was a coincidence. A cruel one, but harmless. Logan was a finance manager. He worked in an office, probably miles from the warehouse. He wouldn't be there. Couldn't be there. Still, something inside him wouldn't settle. He lay awake all night, eyes wide, breath shallow. Every instinct, every ounce of change he had fought for, screamed at him to walk away. But when the sun rose, Calvin made his decision. Just one last job. He would get the money, disappear, and finally have something to offer his son. No more apologies. No more begging for a second chance. He would earn it, even if it meant taking a risk one last time. He called Derek. "I'm in." Derek's voice came cold and focused. "Thursday night. Be ready. No mistakes." Calvin hung up and stared at his reflection in the cracked mirror above the sink. He didn't see the broken man anymore. He saw a father clawing for redemption. And maybe, he thought, redemption sometimes required dirt on your hands. But deep down, behind the resolve, behind the desperation, a quiet voice echoed in his mind. What if he's there? What if something goes wrong? He ignored it. He had to. The night was colder than expected. Rain slicked the asphalt like glass, and the sound of droplets tapping the hood of the van gave Calvin a rhythm to breathe by. Every inhale was laced with doubt, every exhale with silent hope that this would all be over quickly. No complications, no violence, just in and out. Derek sat in the passenger seat, checking his watch for the 5th time. Whitaker shuts down all non-essential systems at 10 sharp. Alarms are internal only. We've got 12 minutes before the backup battery kicks in. Calvin nodded without responding. He was focused, but not calm. His eyes flicked to the warehouse across the street. Silent, unguarded, just like Derek had promised. They moved fast, masks on, gloves tight. Two others joined them, faces Calvin didn't recognize. They slipped through a side entrance Derek claimed was never wired. Inside, the space was massive. Rows of industrial shelving, stacked pallets, forklifts asleep in the dark. They navigated the maze until they reached a locked room labeled Finance and Admin Storage. "This is it," Derek said. He pulled out a small device, something he called a skeleton key for the modern age. With a click, the door unlocked and they entered. Stacks of sealed crates lined the walls, and in the center sat a reinforced vault, the kind designed to survive a fire, a flood, or a war. Derek opened his duffel and handed Calvin a small drill with a silencer attachment. "You do the honors." As Calvin started working on the lock, his heart thudded louder than the drill itself. He kept thinking about Logan, where he might be, whether he ever came to the warehouse, whether his office was close. 3 minutes, one of the others said. The vault clicked. Calvin swung it open. Inside, cash, documents, bearer bonds. Derek's eyes lit up. "Load it all." Suddenly a noise echoed from outside the door, a sharp clatter, like metal dropping. Everyone froze. "Who the hell?" Derek hissed. Footsteps. Quick, hesitant ones. Then a voice. "Hello, is someone—" Calvin's blood turned to ice. That voice. No, it couldn't be. Derek shouted, "Get down!" and shoved Calvin aside. The door burst open. A figure stepped in. The light hit his face just long enough. Logan, wearing a security badge, holding a flashlight, frozen in disbelief. "Dad." The word barely left his lips. A gunshot ripped through the air. It wasn't Calvin, it was one of the others, twitchy, scared, reacting on instinct. Logan staggered back, eyes wide, mouth open but silent. Blood spread across his chest. Calvin screamed, "No!" He rushed forward, catching Logan before he hit the ground. The boy's eyes flickered, confused, searching. "Logan, I didn't know it was you." Another shot rang out. Derek had fired into the ceiling. "We have to go, now!" But Calvin didn't move. He was on his knees, cradling his dying son, his own heart breaking into pieces too small to hold. Logan tried to speak. A tremble, a breath. "I was gonna surprise you." Then silence. The others fled. Footsteps pounded away. Tires squealed outside. Calvin stayed there, rocking slightly, whispering Logan's name over and over like it would bring him back. He didn't hear the sirens at first, or the voice on the loudspeaker telling him to freeze. He didn't feel the hands pulling him back, cuffing him, dragging him away from his son's body. All he saw was Logan's face, frozen in time. At the precinct, Calvin said nothing. He didn't resist, didn't speak. Not until Detective Sarah Bishop sat across from him, reading the incident report. The victim's name was Logan Reed. He was 19 years old. Worked late shifts every Thursday covering security rotations. No priors, clean kid, smart, ambitious. She looked up. "He was your son?" Calvin nodded once, eyes red, lips cracked. "Why was he there?" he asked, voice hollow. "According to HR, he volunteered to help the night crew. Said he wanted to understand every level of the company." She paused. "We also found a letter in his locker, addressed to you. He never sent it." She slid the envelope across the table. Calvin stared at it. His hands shook as he opened the flap. The letter was written in careful, hopeful handwriting. "Dear Dad, I don't know if you'll ever read this. I don't even know if you're still alive. But I hope someday we'll meet. I got promoted this week. I'm trying to be the kind of man you might have been if things were different. Mom doesn't talk about you, but I always wondered who you were. I hope wherever you are, you're okay. If you ever see me, I'll be the one wearing the Reed name with pride." Calvin folded the letter slowly, pressed it to his chest, and broke down. In the sterile silence of that interrogation room, the truth hit harder than any sentence ever could. He hadn't just taken a life. He had taken his own reason to live. Detective Sarah Bishop had seen her share of tragic cases, broken homes, shattered lives, irreversible mistakes. But something about the Whitaker case clung to her like smoke. The story the world had already accepted was clean-cut. A robbery gone wrong, a father unknowingly killing his son, a man ruined by his past. But for Sarah, the pieces didn't fit quite right. Not yet. She started where any seasoned investigator would, with the footage. The grainy security video from the warehouse captured everything. The masked men moving quickly, the vault being opened, Logan's sudden entrance, the fatal moment. But what caught Sarah's attention wasn't the chaos. It was the subtle things. The way Calvin hesitated, the panic in his body language, and most of all his scream, raw, primal, devastating, when Logan fell. That wasn't the scream of a man caught in a crime. It was the sound of a father watching his soul being torn from his chest. She rewound again, slowing the frame when the shooter stepped into view. There, barely visible beneath the glove, a tattoo. A serpent wrapped around a dagger, her breath caught. She knew that symbol. 10 years earlier, it had shown up in multiple gang files, all tied to one name, Derek Malone. Officially, Derek was dead, reported killed in a drug-related shootout, but the body had never been positively ID'd. Just a burned husk and a convenient conclusion. Sarah pulled the old files from storage, and there it was. Mugshots, reports, sealed informant testimony, Calvin Reed's testimony. Calvin had given up Derek's name to avoid a harsher sentence, and then Derek vanished. She ordered a forensic trace on the burner phone found on Calvin. The logs were limited, but one number stood out. It had pinged near the Whitaker warehouse for several nights in a row leading up to the robbery. Whoever owned it had been watching the place. Meanwhile, Calvin remained silent in his cell, refusing to eat or speak. The only thing he asked for was Logan's letter, the one Sarah had found in his son's locker. He read it over and over, lips moving without sound, like a prayer he didn't expect to be heard. The press spun the story as a tragedy of poetic cruelty. Talk shows debated whether Calvin deserved mercy or punishment. Some called him a monster, others a man cursed by fate. But only Sarah seemed to care about what hadn't been explained. She visited Calvin in his cell. No uniform, no notes. Just the truth. "I don't think you killed him on purpose," she said. Calvin didn't answer. "But I also don't think this was just a coincidence." His eyes finally met hers, hollow, tired, broken. "You think I planned it?" he asked. "I think someone else did, and I think you were the target just as much as Logan." At first, Calvin didn't speak. Then he said one name, Derek. Sarah nodded. "I've reopened his file. We found the tattoo on the shooter. He's alive." Calvin closed his eyes, hands trembling. "He knew," he whispered. "He knew Logan worked there." The pieces clicked into place. Calvin hadn't just been manipulated, he'd been baited. Derek had picked the warehouse not for the money, but for the chance to tear Calvin apart from the inside. It wasn't a robbery. It was revenge. Sarah spent the next days digging deeper. She found surveillance footage from a gas station near the warehouse, dated a week before the crime. A man matching Derek's build, buying energy drinks and prepaid phones. He wore a cap low over his eyes, but his wrist, that tattoo, was visible as he paid. She traced his last phone activity to a rundown motel 2 towns over. By the time agents arrived, he was gone. Room cleared, no prints, no trace. But one item had been left behind. A torn photo of Calvin and Melissa back when they were just kids. On the back, a single word was scrawled in pen: payment. With this new evidence, Sarah pushed for Calvin's charges to be re-evaluated. The DA was resistant, public pressure was high, and no one wanted to look soft on crime. But the facts were on their side. Calvin's gun hadn't been fired. The ballistic report confirmed it. The fatal shot came from a different weapon entirely, one that matched a slug recovered in another cold case connected to Derek. Melissa was brought in to testify. She told the court about Logan's desire to meet his father, about how he worked late to prove himself. She wept when she read Logan's journal aloud, his dreams, his fears, his belief that people could change. The courtroom was silent. Eventually, the DA relented. Calvin's murder charge was dropped, but he still faced sentencing for the armed robbery, and he accepted it without protest. He didn't want a free pass. He only wanted the truth known. The media narrative shifted. Now Calvin was the grieving father manipulated into a trap. Sympathy poured in. But Calvin refused interviews. He didn't want pity. He wanted peace, whatever pieces of it he could still find. In prison, he began to write. Letters to Logan, to Melissa, to himself. He started speaking to youth programs through virtual sessions, warning them about people like Derek and about the lies we tell ourselves when we think we can outsmart pain. Sarah visited him one last time before transferring the case to federal authorities hunting Derek. "Why'd you do it?" she asked. "Because I thought one last crime could fix everything," he replied. "But all it did was prove I never left that life." "Not really." She nodded, leaving him with a final question. "If you could say one last thing to Logan, what would it be?" Calvin looked at the floor, then out the window at the sky beyond the bars. "I'd tell him I was proud. So damn proud. And I'm sorry I didn't earn the right to say it sooner. If this story is already making you feel something, anger, sorrow, maybe even a bit of understanding, take a moment to like the video and share your thoughts below. Your voice matters here. Someone else might need to hear exactly what you're thinking right now. It wasn't until 2 weeks after the arrest that the full weight of what happened began to unravel. Detective Sarah Bishop had pushed hard to keep Calvin Reed at the center of the investigation. After all, he was the only one they had in custody, and the evidence was damning. Present at the scene, fleeing suspects, a dead body. But something kept pulling at her instincts, something about Calvin's reaction, his silence, his eyes. She reopened the crime scene footage, this time focusing on the moments after the shooting, zooming in, watching every flinch and gesture. And there it was, a detail she'd missed before. One of the masked men, the one who fired the shot, had a distinct tattoo on his wrist. A serpent coiled around a dagger. Sarah blinked. She'd seen that before. She dug through old files, police logs, mugshots from a decade ago, and there it was, Derek Malone, Calvin's former partner, presumed dead in a gang-related shooting 5 years earlier, except he clearly wasn't. She pulled the call logs from the burner phone Calvin had been carrying, traced them. One number stood out, unregistered, but pinged near the Whitaker warehouse the night before the robbery. She submitted it for a deeper trace. Meanwhile, Calvin sat alone in his cell, rereading the letter from Logan so many times the ink had started to blur. He didn't eat, barely slept. He refused visitors, even from Melissa, who had finally come forward after learning the truth. When Sarah returned to the cell block, she brought the file with her. She placed it gently in front of Calvin. "I know it wasn't you who pulled the trigger." He looked up slowly, cautious. "We found footage, tattoos, and call logs. It was Derek Malone." Calvin's face twitched, then twisted with rage. "You're sure?" he asked. Sarah nodded. "Positive. And we think he set you up." Calvin leaned back, breath caught in his throat. He looked like a man drowning and finally touching bottom. "I didn't know Logan worked there," he whispered. "I swear to God." "I believe you," she said. "But that's not all." Sarah opened another folder. Inside were pages from Logan's private journal, recovered from his office. There were letters, unsent, addressed to Calvin. Thoughts about forgiveness, curiosity, hope. "He wanted to know you," she said. "He didn't hate you. He wanted you to be proud of him." Calvin covered his face. His shoulders shook, but no sound came out. Then came the final blow. "There's one more thing," Sarah said gently. "Derek wasn't just trying to score cash. He knew Logan worked there. He planned it." Calvin's eyes snapped up. "What?" "He knew," she repeated. "He'd been watching Logan for weeks. We found surveillance photos, notes. He used you as bait." It didn't make sense at first. Calvin shook his head, trying to process it. Why would he? And then it hit him. 12 years ago, Calvin had taken a deal. In exchange for a lighter sentence, he gave up the names of several associates, Derek included. But Derek had never been arrested. Instead, he vanished. He had been waiting. watching. And when the time came, he found the one person Calvin could never afford to lose. This was revenge, Calvin muttered, almost to himself. He killed my boy to get to me. Sarah said nothing. What could she say? That night, Calvin didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling of his cell, playing every moment of the past few weeks in reverse. He saw the diner, the burner phone, the smile on Derek's face. It wasn't business. It was personal. It was a trap. And he walked right into it. In the following days, a task force was formed to find Derek. A warrant was issued, his face plastered across state lines, but he was gone, off the grid, like smoke. Melissa came to visit Calvin one last time. They sat across the thick glass, both changed. I should have told him about you, she said quietly. He had this picture. He used to stare at it for hours. Said he wanted to be the man his father could be proud of. Calvin nodded, jaw tight. I was proud of him, he said. He was better than I ever was, ever could be. Melissa's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. I hope you find peace, Calvin. For his sake, I don't deserve it, he whispered. She touched the glass, then left. In the weeks that followed, new evidence kept surfacing. Derek had contacts in multiple states, shell companies, safe houses. He wasn't just surviving, he was thriving. And Calvin's story, now national news, sparked outrage and sympathy in equal measure. But none of it mattered to Calvin. He had lost the only thing that mattered, and justice, even if served, wouldn't bring Logan back. One morning a letter arrived in Calvin's cell. No return address. Inside was a single Polaroid photo. Logan as a child, maybe 5 years old, holding a toy hammer, wearing a crooked grin. On the back, scribbled in sharp pen, "He got that smile from you." Calvin stared at it for hours. Then, for the first time in weeks, he spoke to the guard. "I want to talk." "To who?" the guard asked. "Everyone." He was ready to tell the world what really happened, not to clear his name, but to make sure Logan's wasn't buried with lies. The courtroom was silent as Calvin Reed stepped up to the stand. No suit, no tie, just the prison uniform and the weight of a man who had nothing left to protect, nothing left to prove. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered. Somewhere in the crowd, Melissa sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, a photograph of Logan resting beside her. "I'm not here to ask for forgiveness," Calvin began, his voice steady. "I know what I did, and I'll carry that for the rest of my life." He looked at the jury, then at the judge, then down at the floor. "I walked back into that life thinking I could control it. Just one job, I told myself. One score to fix everything. But there's no such thing as clean in a dirty game. I thought I could be both things, a criminal and a father. But all I ended up doing was taking away the one person who gave me a reason to live clean." His voice cracked, but he didn't stop. "My son Logan didn't die because I was a bad shot or in the wrong place. He died because I let myself believe I could cheat fate. I was wrong." The trial moved quickly after that. With Sarah Bishop's testimony, the journal entries, and the forensic evidence linking Derek Malone to the crime, Calvin was cleared of first-degree murder. But he was still sentenced. 15 years for armed robbery, conspiracy, and unlawful possession of a firearm. He accepted it. No appeal, no protest. In prison, Calvin became something unexpected, a voice. He started speaking to youth groups, sending video messages from inside. He told them about Logan, about Derek, about the cost of silence and the illusion of shortcuts. Each word was an offering. Not to clean his name, but to protect someone else's future. He wrote to Melissa often, though she never replied. Still, he understood. He had stolen something that could never be replaced. Years passed. Logan's story became a symbol. Headlines called him the boy caught in the crossfire of redemption. A scholarship was named after him. A mural of his face was painted on the side of a community center. Underneath it, a quote from one of his letters, "I just want to be the man my father could be proud of." Calvin saw it once, in a photo someone mailed him. He stared at the boy's face, that grin, that fire in his eyes, and for the first time in years, He allowed himself to believe in something beyond punishment. In the prison yard, Calvin planted trees. He never spoke much about why, but those who knew him said he treated them like living memorials, as if each root could anchor a memory and each branch might someday stretch high enough to touch forgiveness. Because some crimes live forever, but so do the lessons we leave behind. What would you do if your past came back in the most devastating way imaginable? Calvin Reed thought he was doing the right thing. One final mistake to fix a lifetime of them. But in trying to become the father he thought his son deserved, he destroyed the very future he was chasing. And now he lives with a truth no parent should ever face. He pulled the trigger on his own legacy. But this isn't just a story about crime. It's about cycles, about silence, about choices made in desperation that echo for generations. So we ask you, if you were Calvin, if you were Logan, if you were Melissa, what would you have done? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. And if you believe that real stories, even the darkest ones, can teach us how to be better, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications. Because the truth is, we're all just one decision away from changing everything. And sometimes it takes the worst mistake to show us the value of doing what's right.